Right. Well, hi, everyone. I'm going to also share my screen just to welcome you all. In case this is your first time attending a co-active trade program, we're so excited to have all of you for this session. Been really looking forward to it, and couldn't have came at a better time. So really grateful. Thank you so much, Tanya, for being here and for everyone for tuning in. So let us just begin with a first high-level introduction. My name is Sharnae Sanders. I serve as the program manager at COAC Detroit. My pronouns are she and her, and I have the wonderful opportunity of leading our nonprofit wellbeing series. Well, for those of you who may be unfamiliar with COAC, we are a resource hub for nonprofits and community organizations across Southeast Michigan, really all about accelerating transformational impact with this community. And that is done through collaborative idea generation, cross-sector resources, and equitable access to world-class programming and learning opportunities. We operate virtually and have a physical location in Detroit in the New Center neighborhood, but we definitely invite you all to connect with us even outside of this program. We have some other programs that are happening, such as our CoLab Connect and our Candid Financial Workshop series. I'm happy to drop some links in the chat towards the end of the session and include some of this information in our follow-up email. So we invite you to definitely be engaged for this series. And if there's other things that catch your interest, please utilize us as a resource. But for the purpose of our time together today, I welcome you all to the Nonprofit Wellbeing Series. COAC will actually be celebrating our 5th anniversary this June, so next month. So we've been doing the Wellbeing Series, actually kicked it off in 2019, so quite some time. And it's been really exciting to recognize how the conversation and the topics of well-being have continued to become more popular, and really people are really getting more engaged about what it looks like to activate well-being within their workplace and to also practice self and community care. So we're excited to have this series really to be a space that uplifts the vital connection between self and community care and pushing well-being for a culture shift at the organization and sector level, really for us to reimagine in the ways that we think about well-being, in the ways that we think about work, or even what it looks like to navigate in this sector. I think there's been so much conversation in the past around sometimes wearing this badge of honor as if you have to overwork yourself or have to do all of these things, wear so many hats, but really kind of taking a step back to really recognize what are the ways that we can support our holistic well-being in this work, but still do meaningful and impactful work for our community. So I definitely hope this series is something that sparks a lot of conversation, as well as give you some really strategic tactics and tools that you can apply. And these are just a handful of the well-being sessions that we've hosted in the past with so many wonderful partners, because none of this work would be possible if it wasn't for these organizations. So I'm really grateful for this experience and these opportunities to continue to connect with them, as well as our virtual resource library. So these are some of the resources that we currently have. So in case there's a past session that you have not attended, or that you're really just interested in learning more about a specific topic, we definitely invite you to check out our resource library so that we're able to share some of these resources with you, and you're able to really kind of catch some of the gems that were shared. And all of this can be found at coacdetroit.org, and I would definitely be sure to include the links to these in our follow-up email. And also want to uplift that we do have a podcast series called Natural Collisions. And actually lately, the last few episodes have been around the topic of funding well-being. So our Fund Well series really focused on the importance of funding well-being for nonprofit leaders and teams. I definitely invite you to check out some of the latest episodes, really talking about ways that we can invest in rest and our well-being to really shift culture in our sector. So if you do listen to podcasts, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts, as well as on YouTube. But now at this moment, I'm going to stop sharing so we can actually give our featured guest the wonderful attention and the spotlight that she deserves. But before doing that, I do want to just share a few words about Tanya Tucker. So we're so excited. Tanya Tucker has over 20 years of experience in the nonprofit, education, and youth development fields. Her career has focused on supporting low income and undervalued youth, building relationships with external partners, developing innovative programs, and leading dynamic, results oriented teams. We're so excited to have her. She's currently the Chief of National Engagement and Partnerships of the Full Frame Initiative. And on this note, I'll pass it over to Tanya to introduce herself and to get us started for the session.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. I'm so thrilled to be here. Shanae and I were just talking before we started that it was months ago as we were sort of hatching this plan to do this webinar, and before you know it, it's already May. So hopefully folks are having a good start of spring, and from wherever you are joining us from, that the weather has turned and you're able to enjoy one of my favorite seasons. So just a little bit more about me. That's sort of beyond my official work bio. I grew up in Boston with a younger sister and was raised by my mom and grandmother. And certainly while we, faced challenges and we had needs as a family, my sister and I grew up with an abundance of joy. And when I look back on that time in my growing up experience, certainly without using the words, but my mother and grandmother were creating the conditions for me and my sister to have well-being and to thrive and to really set us on a path where we felt and knew we mattered, and had a vision of limitless possibilities. And it really is that family foundation that drives the work I do, not only in Full Frame, but my entire career. And what we know is that our workplaces really can have a significant impact on our well-being. And so that's what I'm here to talk with you about today, and to share a bit of our framework on well-being and how that relates to staff well-being. So I'll be sharing some information, but there's also be an opportunity for you all to engage and kind of reflect on the material that I'm sharing, and think of your own questions and your own organizations and workplaces and how this relates. I'm going to share a few tools that you'll get to take away, and hopefully can be some concrete next steps to kind of take these concepts into your organizations. And then, of course, we'll have some time for Q&A at the end, but I'd love to make this as much as possible a conversation. So do feel free to put questions or comments in the chat, or even come off, mute when you want to add something to the conversation. So a little bit about Full Frame Initiative and kind of who we are and how we think about well-being. And so Full Frame Initiative, we are a national social change organization, and we partner with government, community, advocates, artists, researchers, all who share our commitment to making this a country where everyone has a fair shot at well-being. That is our North Star. That is what drives everything we do at the organization. And what we know, which will be, no new news, I think, to this audience, is that we live in a country where everyone doesn't have that fair shot, and it is by actually design. And I'm sure many of your organizations the work that you do and your missions are actually aligned with trying to give everyone that fair shot at well-being. And so as we think about well-being and that North Star, well-being, particularly over the last few years, has become a much more popular word, right? Lots of folks are using it, and many folks have different meanings and different ways that they're, actually defining and using the term. So I actually want to start with hearing from you all and finding out, what does it mean when you hear the word well-being? What does well-being mean to you? And so there's a little Menti poll here. You can either scan the QR code to get to it, or you can go to menti.com and then put in that 74522589 code. And just think of either one word or a short phrase that comes to mind when you think of well-being. And I'll give folks a minute to start sharing. All right, there we go. Now we can see what everybody's putting in. Peace, rest, transformation, contentment, liberation, love it, justice, community, security, thriving, stability, health. Me, love that answer. Content, comfort. I'll give it just a couple seconds in case somebody else wants to weigh in. Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing what well-being means to you. And I think with everything that you all shared, certainly how FFI looks at well-being and defines well-being, some of those terms are a part of our definition. And so I'll ask, for the time that we're together, I'm going to offer our definition of well-being and what it means to full frame the work that we do. At its core, well-being really is about individually and collectively being whole, right? It really is what matters to us. And our sort of wonky definition that you see up in the corner is that well-being is the set of needs and experiences universally required in combination and balance to weather challenges and to have health and hope. So I know that that's a mouthful, but how we see well-being is that it truly is how each of us lives our lives on a daily basis. We're hardwired for it, right? It's in our DNA. It's a biological drive for all of us. And it's universal, right? Like, this isn't what well-being means to people living in poverty or folks who are homeless. This is actually what well-being means for all of us, right? It's universal. And for us, it truly is a drive. It's not a destination, right? It's not an endpoint that you get to. Um, and it also doesn't mean that when we're accessing our well-being, that everything is just, rainbows and unicorns, right? It actually helps us weather challenges. Doesn't mean we're not ever going to have, right, challenges and problems, but when we're able to truly access our well-being, we can weather those challenges much better. So, what is it that we actually all need to weather challenges and to have health and hope? Those set of needs and experiences is actually what we call the 5 domains of well-being. And I'm going to quickly go through what those are. And as I go through them, think about how you meet your needs for well-being in each of those domain areas. So, social connections or social connectedness. This truly is about our experience of relationships, right? It's we all need relationships where we're able to share information, give or get emotional support, um, share, concrete or get material help. Um, it's two-way, right? It's not just receiving, but it's also giving. Relationships where we can grow. It's also about a sense of belonging, right? Places where we belong, people that we're around that we feel, a sense of belonging, where we feel valued, where we feel needed. And it doesn't have to be really sort of strong and deep ties that you think about, like with your family or best friends. I always like to give the example. I mentioned I'm from Boston. I'm a huge Boston sports fan. And so if I'm walking down the street or walking through the airport and I see somebody in a Celtics t-shirt or a Patriots jersey, somewhere inside of me, I'm kind of like, oh, they're my people, right? Like there's this little sense of belonging there, even though I don't really know anything else about them except that we're fans of the same sports team, right? So it doesn't have to be, it's a continuum of belonging and what belonging means to you. Stability. This really is about, how can we expect on a daily, weekly basis that our situation and our status fundamentally kind of stays the same, right? A sense of predictability in our lives from day to day, from week to week. And we're able to experience stability when we have some predictability through routines or anchors that we can kind of count on in our days, in our weeks. And when we don't have those, we feel a little, off. I think we all have, routines that we have. For me, I'm sort of addicted to my coffee in the morning. And when I don't have my coffee in the morning, it's definitely off, and you probably don't want to be around me. But it really is having the ability to have some sense of predictability each day, and also knowing that sort of small changes and small obstacles really won't have a snowball effect into really big problems and impacts in our lives. And we can think of ways that, certainly that our workplaces and our organizations provide some of that sense of stability and routine and some predictability. So safety. And when we say safety, it really is both about emotional safety and physical safety. And at its core, it's, do I get to show up as my true, authentic self without fear of danger or shame? And this is true about all of these domains, but I can only define what makes me feel safe, right? It's not going to be perhaps the same thing that makes Charnay feel safe. So it's very individualized, even though these are all, universal drives. And we can experience safety from people, from places, from systems. And there are times when we may feel physically safe, but not emotionally safe, and vice versa. So it's important to think about both of those dimensions when you're thinking about safety. And then there's this thing we call mastery, which we've been talking about, kind of going back and renaming this because it can confuse people. But actually, what we're talking about really is a sense of purpose and influence, right? Do I get to influence the decisions that affect my life on a day-to-day basis, decisions for the future? This is also a sense of like purpose and accomplishment and progress, right? Am I working at something and I can actually see the results of something? Do I care about what I'm doing? Do the people that are around me care about and respect and value what I'm doing? It's a sense of sort of confidence and feeling empowered and kind of stretching and challenging ourselves to do different things. So mastery isn't about sort of being the best at something or being an expert at something. It really is putting in the effort and then being able to see the results. So that's what we mean by mastery. And then there's meaningful access to relevant resources. Am I able to meet what we think of as basic needs, right? My need for food, shelter, clothing, air, water, in ways that don't cause extreme difficulty or don't cause shame or danger. And it's really important here in terms of resources that are relevant to you and your circumstance, so you actually get to define and decide what that relevance looks like. And so it has to be, that experience has to be relevant to us and our situation and our context. And it can't just, exist. So that's why there's the coupling of access and relevance. And so, as I said, this is a universal framework, right? This is about all of us. And so we're all trying every day to meet our needs along these dimensions, whether we're sort of, aware of it or not. And it's not hierarchical, right? One is not more important than the other. There may be times in our lives where we're actually maybe more focused on one of these dimensions than the other, but they really are, they work together. We have assets in each of these areas, and we also have challenges in each of the areas. And so we need all of these in combination and balance. And I think one of the main takeaways from this framework is that if we actually understand that we all move through life trying to meet these same needs, then it gives us a little bit of insight into thinking about staff well-being and what it takes to support staff well-being. And what is it about our organizations, our culture, our practices, the rules and policies of our organizations, the structures that either work with our drive for well-being or can sometimes, maybe unintentionally, but undermine our drives for well-being. And so that's why we say, how we look at well-being really is more than just self-care, but there is a connection between self-care and well-being. And like all behavior, self-care can actually help us meet our needs for well-being, right? Our self-care is, taking time to meet up with friends, to take a, yoga class that we like together. And so that can be meeting our needs for our social connection. But we also know that self-care results in trade-offs, right? If we're taking care of ourselves, that means something else isn't getting done at that moment in time. And sometimes those trade-offs can actually decrease our sense of well-being and perhaps not be worth it. And we're going to talk about trade-offs a little more because that's an important piece of this well-being work as well. And so I hope as I've been going through these domains that you've been thinking about how you meet your own needs in these different areas. And so I want to take a few minutes for you all to kind of self reflect a bit on how you're meeting your needs in each of these domain areas. There is a well-being in the workplace tool, and Charnay is going to put that link in the chat for you all so that you have this with you. But this is just a way to folks to kind of, be aware of and write down in each of these areas kind of the most important ways or the most present ways that you're meeting your needs in each of these domains. So, how am I meeting my needs for social connection, for safety, for stability, for mastery? If folks want to take just a minute or two to jot down some ideas, it doesn't have to actually be on this tool, but just jotting down some of the ways that you're currently meeting your needs in some of these areas, and I'll give you a minute to do so. As you're doing that and reflecting on that and writing some of these things down, what are the important things about actually surfacing for yourself how you're meeting these needs? One is to become, more aware in terms of like actually what's driving the decisions you're making, how you're spending your time. But then you're also more easily able to figure out, so if this is important to me and this is an important way of how I'm meeting these needs, what's getting in the way of that? How is my workplace, my organization actually supporting these needs for me? Or are there ways that actually they're putting up, barriers and challenges? And some of these things, may be ways that you can individually, make some adjustments or changes to better meet your needs for well-being. And then some of these things will be, sort of out of your control and out of your hands and need sort of, larger decision making for the organization and larger, culture impacts. But I just think it's a good way to just become more aware of what we're actually, doing each day and actually naming it. And so as you're writing those down, the other layer that I want you to be thinking about, if you've got a few of those ideas jotted down, is to think about, okay, if this is how I'm meeting my needs for, let's say, social connectedness, how is my workplace supporting my ability to do that? And so think about, what are the ways, whether it's a policy, whether it's maybe just a culture piece in your organization, could be the way, your organization is structured, some of the practices. So think about some of those ways that your workplace is actually supporting your ability to meet your needs for well-being. And I'd love for, as folks are thinking about that, to either put in chat some of the ways your workplace is supporting your well-being, or even come off mute and share with folks. But what are you thinking in terms of how your workplace is supporting. I know one of the things as I think about FFI in my own workplace, uh, one of the things that truly has been supporting my social connectedness, particularly as we are a fully remote organization. We, obviously made that move during the pandemic and then decided that actually this works with us, and it allowed us to get wonderful team members from around the country to work at the organization. But one of the things that sort of working remotely took away that I actually really liked about being in person with people was that sort of connection and just sharing more of the social side of ourselves. And now it's more like, yes, we meet a lot virtually, but it's get right to the work. So one of the things that our organization has done is actually think of ways for us to get together virtually that's not work related, right? Like we have monthly tea times where we can just come together and share a cup of coffee, and depending on time zones, right, share a meal and just talk about whatever. We've got Slack channels where we're sharing funny stories and pictures of our pets and things like that, to not the same, right, as connecting in person, but we're thinking of ways of how do we make that still have that social connection, even though we're virtual. So as you're thinking about how your workplace supports your well-being, of course, the flip side of that is also thinking about, all right, well, what's my workplace doing that actually is hindering my ability to meet my needs for well-being, right? And thinking along those same lines of culture and policies and practice and our structures.
So I thought of an example if you
Yeah,
want
great.
me to
Thank you.
share. Okay. So it kind of answers both step 2 and 3. I work for Jewish Family Service, so we have a policy that was recently set up that no one needs to be, in order to like basically keep your life work balance in check. That our policy is that you shouldn't be emailing anyone after Shabbos on Friday
Mm-hmm.
until Monday. So basically our work culture is and there's an official policy out that don't email anyone on Shabbos after Friday and until we come back to work on Monday. Step 3 is though is that oftentimes people don't follow that rule, including a lot of executive members of
Yeah.
our team. So sometimes it's like we have these policies and they sent them out so everybody knows, but when um higher or executive level team members don't follow it, sometimes it's hard to figure out which direction to take from that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's a great example. And I also, wonder if, you can remind folks that, hey, remember, we all agreed that, this is going to be a norm and a policy. And maybe if folks have to get that email out, use it as a scheduled email, right? So you're getting it out of your brain, you're typing it in, but you're scheduling it to hit someone's, email box at the time, after we said that like no email is going to be exchanged. And maybe that's a way
Yeah.
to kind of get around that. People kind of get out the urgency of like, I just got to get this into an email, but it doesn't hit to a certain time.
Yeah, in my worst of times, I almost thought about setting up an auto reply to like
Yeah.
just my organization, being like, "Oh, I'm following the Shabbos policy. I'll email you back on Monday."
Yes, right. I like that as well. Thank you for sharing that. Other thoughts on either how your organization or workplace is supporting, or what the things your organization workplace is doing that perhaps is hindering?
I can share. I'm from Brazil. I work in a consulting firm, and I don't know, my experience working with organizations is that I see a lot of tools to help the well-being of coworkers, but not very few organizations are working on the leaders. So you have all these tools, all these programs, all great, but if the leaders don't change their attitude, don't change their manner of leading and handling the team, you're not going to have a change. So I wonder if this is something also that you see there or not.
Yeah, that's a great point, and very true, right? Like, culture can only change, organizations can only change if it's both, right, staff level and leadership level. And I think, you could think about some of these tools and concepts, maybe in an organization there's a way for just the leaders to kind of, focus on this and figure out, like, okay, well, how are we doing on these dimensions? How are we leading our teams, leading the organization around these dimensions? And also having the staff level do the same. And then maybe there's a coming together of, like, comparing, right? Maybe leadership thinks, like, yeah, we're doing great on all these dimensions, yet the staff is feeling like, no, there are all these things getting in the way. And that opens up a lane for some communication, for some conversation. I find that it is often, there's usually at least a leader in an organization that is more prone and willing, right, to really dive in to this well-being piece, even if it's not sort of the overall nature of the leadership. So it's also trying to find out, who do you think are the champions for this way of thinking and to really drive some of these well-being practices, and working from, start getting that starting place, whether it's a leader or key, staff people. And I think it is easier not to do this alone, right? It does need to be a group of folks together sharing the conversation. I find that so many workplaces, even if they've got, like, the policies in place and some of the rules as you all have been talking about, that you feel like that's the work, right? We check the box. We've got this well-being policy and this rule over here. But if you're actually not coming together on a regular basis to actually discuss, how's this really playing out, right? Like, yeah, we've got that policy, but people aren't really adhering to it. And, well, why is that? And really trying to surface some of those things that are underneath it. These aren't sort of the one and done, check the box, we've got well-being forever, right? These are the things that you have to work at, and continue to come back to, and touch on, and have conversations about. So. Anyone else want to share before I move on?
Yeah, Tanya, if I could uplift like some of the comments in the chat, there was like a lot of connection between like flexible work schedules and like Fridays also having like that space or that time to reclaim, even like paid lunch and hangouts, as well as like monthly mental health days where our team takes a day off to unplug and tend to our well-being. And also like coming like from the freelance point, doing freelance work, there's like still the space for people to really supply that social connectedness with coworkers and agency/choice over the work. So like these are just kind of some of those suggestions or ways that people have uplifted along with the flexible schedule, like having time for that better work-life balance.
That's great. Great. Thank you. Thank you for pointing to the chat. One of the things that our organization did recently was institute another week off, right? Not like an extra week of vacation for everyone, but truly a week where the office is closed, where everybody's off at the same time. You don't have to take your vacation, but just extra rest and regeneration for the team of the whole, right? So we're all off. We all don't feel like, oh, but I'm probably missing X and I should probably just check my email, once or twice. Nope, all shut down, regenerate, and come back. And so we have this sort of extra week in July that we just started doing that. So those are all great examples and great ideas. And I think one of the things that's also, behind some of these ideas is who's deciding them, right? Who's coming up with those ideas? I don't think there are many people who wouldn't like, right, a flexible workday or an extra day off or half-day Fridays and all of that. But I do think there is something to like going to your team of the whole to figure out like which options would actually work best, right? Is it a half-day Friday, or is it for the entire summer, or is it just a 1 week kind of thing? And so that was also part of our process, right? Actually asking team members of what would matter the most to you and what really would help you tap into your well-being the best. So thank you all for sharing. And one of the things, like I mentioned before, is that when we start surfacing how you individually meet your needs, how your workplace is either supporting or hindering that, you may come up with things that, oh, wait, I can just change this on my own, right? I can, make this adjustment or remove something or add something on my own. So there's some individual level of change that can be made, but it can also, right, just being aware of your well-being needs. But there's also many of these things that go beyond our individual control, right? And for change. So I think using this tool as leaders in organizations, as supervisors of teams, right, to intentionally build in that time, whether it's staff meetings, team meetings, to sort of use this as a touchstone, is really important, because it will help us surface how people are meeting their needs, what's getting in the way, and what are the trade-offs of some of the decisions that we have to make. And so that's where I'm going to go now, is to trade-offs. That is an important part of how we define well-being. So the 5 domains that we've been focusing on, that's all about that set of needs and experiences. As a part of that definition, there were the words, and we need that in combination and balance. And that's where the trade-offs piece comes in. And so every time we make a decision or that we're going through some kind of change, we are balancing trade-offs, and we're asking that question of ourselves, is it worth it to me, right? All of you showed up for this webinar today. Thank you so much. But you were balancing trade-offs, right? Okay, is this webinar worth it to me? If I spend, my hour here, that means I can't do X or I can't go to Y. And you were weighing those trade-offs in the back of your mind, and you said, yeah, I want to show up for this. This is important to me. And so we are making, small and large decisions every day and weighing those trade-offs for ourselves. And what organizations can do is actually make decisions that force unsustainable trade-offs for their staff, for their teams. And it's in this unsustainable trade-offs area where actually you cannot sustain change. And so what we do so often is we tend to judge people's behaviors and reactions to change, instead of actually thinking about, oh, wait a minute, maybe they're just actually weighing the trade-offs differently than I would have weighed the trade-offs. And so it's not, we always say that it's not enough for people to just, want a change or be motivated for change. Those trade-offs actually have to be worth it and have to be sustainable for folks. And I think part of well-being and well-being for our staff is figuring out in our organizations, what are the trade-offs for some of the decisions, for some of the policies or rules that we're putting into place? And what do those trade-offs look like for different groups of people and folks on the team? There are going to be trade-offs. First of all, we can't get rid of trade-offs, right? Because it's just sort of a natural a natural occurrence for every decision that we're making. But we can minimize, right, unsustainable trade-offs. We can help surface trade-offs so we can understand it and maybe make different decisions, or at least unpack some of those trade-offs to see, like, okay, what would make this change worth it, to me? And so the other tool that I want to share with you all really is around anticipating trade-offs, which I think is a key part, and really creating that deliberate and intentional space to do so. So Chardonnay will put another link so you have this tool as well. But I think the important piece of making space to really examine trade-offs is that you can really identify the source of perhaps angst or anxiety that staff is going to have to, some tangible change that's happening in the workplace. And it can be addressed up front instead of just waiting for sort of the behavior afterwards or the fallout afterwards. Looking at trade-offs also helps staff better understand what has worked for them in actually adjusting and making change to different policies, to different rules, practices in the past. And you're able to kind of carry that forward. And it also helps leaders or supervisors in organizations identify how the decisions that they're making perhaps impacts different groups of staff differently. And so it's all a way to sort of unpack what's underneath some of the decisions and the change that we make in organizations. And so to use this tool, I'm just going to walk you through the tool for your use later on, but it really is look at a recent change or an anticipated change that you're making in the organization, right? So whether that's a new policy, maybe some change that's around culture, but some new or recently new decision that's affecting the organization. And set aside some intentional time for members of your organization, members of your team, to really kind of work through on their own this sort of trade-offs worksheet. And I say set aside time instead of like, just giving out the worksheet and saying, okay, on your own, fill it out. Because we know people are really busy, and it's really important to actually give people permission to take that time to focus on these things. So that's why that's important. I think as you're deciding on like what specific issue, decision, policy, rule that you're going to examine and kind of unpack, if there are non-negotiables, just state that up front, right? Like, not everything is sort of up for discussion, conversation, like, let's weigh it. If there are those non-negotiables, be transparent about it, right? These are the things we can't change, but there's a whole area over here that, we can change, we could add to or remove that might make this, better for some people. So I think doing this really helps with building that trust and the transparency, and really getting a lot of different voices in the decision-making and change process for organizations. And so you have folks, and I'll show you what the actual worksheet looks like, but you have folks fill that out, and then you bring people together, and you all know your organization. So whether that's the full org or specific teams that you want to work with, but the important part of this is, how do we talk about this and have a conversation collectively about sort of this new decision? What are the possible positive or negative effects for people? What's going to be challenging about this new policy or decision? Are there certain people that would be impacted more than others? What does that look like? And then how can you build in what's worked for you in the past when there's been a change? And how can you bring that forward to any new change that you're going through? And then I think this key question of asking people, particularly around the areas that aren't negotiable, right? Well, what actually would make this more sustainable for you? And it really is just having that collective conversation. I think you'll find that, sometimes people think, well, I'm probably the only one who thinks this way, or, maybe I'm the only one on the team where really it will affect me in this negative way. And then as you bring people together, you can see that there's maybe some commonalities across people. And it just helps you think about some of these decisions in a new light, in a different way. And so this is what the actual worksheet looks like, right? How can I prepare for change that staff would fill out? And it really takes you through those 5 domains that we went over, right? So how, what's the change that's actually going to happen in the organization? And then how's that change going to actually affect my social connection? How's that going to perhaps affect my safety, my stability, in both positive and negative ways, right? And also identifying and why that's important to me. Going back to that why question is really key to all of this. So it takes you through each of the domains, figuring out positive, possible negative effects, why it's important. And then at the end, it gets to that piece where you're thinking about what actually makes change possible, right? Because change is happening all the time in our workplaces, outside of our workplaces. And there are things that we do for ourselves, that we tell ourselves, that ways that we show up that makes that change bearable for us. So how do you unpack that a bit, so then you can bring that piece and those pieces of yourself forward in whatever this new change is, right? So what made change possible, right? Even if it was only for a little bit of time, right? What were the supports that were in place? What were the key people that made that change possible? What did they do? How did they show up? What were the circumstances, right? So just really unpacking that in a way that then makes people bring that forward to new change. And then that sheds light on it, right? So that you can share this with your team leader or supervisor or amongst your peers. And so then that, there's a joint conversation on, okay, how do we weather this change going forward together as an organization? So all of us kind of come out on the other side in a better place. As I've talked about this trade-offs piece and this specific tool, I'm wondering if there are ideas on how you might use this tool or even the other well-being in the workplace, kind of the 5 domains tool at your organization or in your work. And you can come off mute or put it in chat, but just sort of initial thoughts of how you might bring this into your organization.
Well, hi, I'm Vicki Elmer and I lead Mint Artists Guild, and we are a really small nonprofit where I'm the only year-round employee. So I kind of set a lot of the things in motion, and then we bring in contractors and others for special projects. And I'm going to be having conversations with them at our next meeting about wellness. And we actually do wellness training for our youth in the summer. And so some of the things you're offering, some of the ideas you're offering, I'll be taking to our creative youth this summer and talking to them about the trade-offs that they need to make to be successful, because it's a limited program. They only get 6 weeks, of paid opportunity.
Yeah.
And so what are the trade-offs they're willing to make, to do that? So I think it'll be really helpful for us, both as our team leaders for the summer and then for the youth to think about some of the things you've talked about. So thank you.
That's great. That's great. And I love that you brought up, being a small organization and, some work with contractors and lots of, other folks. I think we have found that these tools and this particular focus on well-being and trade-offs works with all sizes of organizations, agencies, institutions, and particularly if you're a small organization, do think about how you can use these tools with your volunteers, with your contractors, right? With folks who are, participating in your programs. What I know about our sector and nonprofits is that we are usually so focused on our participants and the people that we serve and partner with in the community, and then give sort of short shrift and attention to our own well-being. And so we often think of this as a parallel process, right? So every day, I think we're, whether we've been using the term or not, really focused on the well-being of the people and the communities we serve. And so how do we make our own well-being and creating workplaces that are environments that support well-being also a priority? So I think any of these tools can be used inside your organization, outside with external partners and participants, because it really is sort of the same process. Any other ideas about how you might bring in or use some of these tools in your org or work, or introduce them, or folks that you're like, oh, I want to make sure this gets in the hand of my, supervisor right away? Or
I know that I'm gonna share it with our HR for sure, and like the reporting as well, because I think it would be
yes,
really helpful for him.
thank you, Brooke. HR is key. HR is key. So many, of our, policies and rules emanate right from our HR teams and offices. And so bringing those peers and HR leaders into this, and perhaps it's a different way that they're thinking about well-being, I think is key. Thank you for mentioning that. Okay. I think some of the key questions that I want you sort of taking away from this presentation and this work really is, how can my workplace ensure that it is not undermining people's well-being, and particularly staff well-being, right? So how can I ensure that? How do I look at the decisions we're making, the policies we're putting in place, our overall culture, right? How we're in relationship and connecting with each other. What are the, structures that we have in place that could possibly be undermining staff well-being? And really, how we know that is we've actually got to ask people. This also doesn't work if, like, you want to focus on it, but then you just assume, right? Just the leaders get into a room and are like, okay, here's how people are feeling about this. Well, how do we know that for sure? Are we just making assumptions? Are we just going off of like what you've observed in, behavior, or just one discussion? Really use this as an opportunity to touch base with the teams and have really substantive conversations around this. And then I think the other key question to think about is, what are the trade-offs of taking time for self-care? Because I would say that most people aren't making that time for self-care. Not that we don't want to care for ourselves, not that we don't see it as important, but that the trade-offs aren't quite worth it because of all the other things that are the ways our organizations and work days are organized, and the work that we have to do. So it's one thing to have it on sort of the face of a policy, right? That, there's time for self-care, but yet my to-do list hasn't gone down, or right, or now I'm going to get further behind if I take that time. So that's also where examining the trade-offs really can come into play. And so as you're thinking about this work and your workplace, and how do you build, right? How do you build on your organization's support for well-being and minimizing trade-offs? Think about, what are the strategies that we can implement that support healthy workplace connections, right? How can we create an environment that truly provides safety for our team, right? Are we the workplace where people say, like, I actually get to show up as my true self? I get to be whole as a part of this organization. What are the ways that we can provide stability and anchors that provide some sense of predictability, particularly in today's world that is so chaotic? What are those ways that we can provide that stability in our workplaces, right? How can we improve staff mastery and have folks have a sense of purpose? And are there ways that many different people get to influence the work and the decisions that get made in our organization? And are there relevant resources that we can provide access to that actually enhance staff's, learning, their skills, their performance? ways that we can address staff needs, wellness. I think if we start asking these sort of deeper questions that get at well-being, it's actually easier to get to some of the self-care stuff, some of the stuff that I would put in just the sort of wellness category. This way of thinking about well-being gets us, I think, to a deeper and kind of more well-rounded meaning and definition, and certainly I think can affect and impact lots of dimensions of our organizations and workplaces. Hopefully these tools are useful and you can bring them back and work with them in your organizations, with your teams, even just, reflecting on them individually or in groups. I think it's really important to, as I've, mentioned a few times, like, we have to listen to what staff are saying about, their own well-being, how the workplace is helping with that, addressing trade-offs. And then if you're interested, I think, come visit us. There's many more resources and tools that you can share. So I'd love to get to, a couple of questions if folks have. Folks have been chiming up throughout, which is great. I know one of the questions that came in beforehand was this piece around, how do you make this integrated into a workplace, well-being into a workplace that really just talks about it, but we actually don't, practice it. We don't do anything about it. I think one of the interesting ways of looking at it through this frame and perhaps using some of these tools is that you can almost get at all of this and you don't even have to use the term well-being, right? Like, this is just a way of like looking at how is our organization operating and running, and what is the impact of some of our decisions and our policies and rules. I think too often people think of well-being as something squishy and touchy-feely. And so, it's good to say, because, I think I've been told I'm supposed to be a workplace that, is about well-being, but this actually gives us a more concrete way to approach it that, kind of eliminates the sort of squishy, touchy-feely, feel to it. So hopefully, that can help.
If I could just jump in, Tanya, just one, thank you so much. I'm so blown away and so appreciative of these tools and resources that you've shared, and really appreciate what you mentioned about also sometimes well-being feeling a little squishy or just something that's really fragile, because also recognizing, like, yes, caring for the holistic well-being of our team members and making sure the work environment is something people feel like they can thrive and not literally just survive and try to get through the day or the 5 o'clock hour, to be able to just make it through and then go home to various other responsibilities or duties, or just those that they're tending to and caring for. But I really appreciate this. I think this has definitely given me also really great insight that I'll be sharing with my team as well. But we'd love to, yes, open it to any questions or comments from those that are here, and just any reflections, but just so much gratitude for making this feel more concrete, because I do feel like well-being sometimes just feels a little up in the air. We want to bring it down, but it can be hard to do that.
Right, absolutely. And I'm going to put the invitation out for, like, if you all do use any of the tools, we'd love to hear from you on sort of how it's gone and how those conversations have went. We are always trying to evolve our tools and make them better to meet the needs of organizations and institutions. So if you do use them or any of our other resources, do let us know how it goes. All right. Well, thank you all so much. I really appreciate you taking time out of what I know are extremely busy schedules these days to join this, and hope you took away something that you can use in the future.
Thank you.
You, Tanya. Thank you, yes, to everyone that joined. Please share any feedback that you have regarding any of the takeaways from today's session. I did just drop the link in the chat. And you can also use the QR code if that's easier. But I definitely do also invite you all to attend some of our upcoming sessions. We'll be having like a breath break that will incorporate some really supportive breath work and relaxation techniques from Rabbi G with Kids Kicking Cancer. And that's going to be happening on Wednesday, September 11th from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. in person at COEC. So for those of you who are interested in joining us in person, please feel free to. If not, and you're not able to get to the location, no worries. We'll actually be having another session on October 15th from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's virtual. That will be focused on restorative practices. Dr. Sandra Dalton Smith, known for her 7 types of rest framework, will be sharing like the different types of restorative activities that we can do and engage in, and how to really support our own well-being and setting those healthy boundaries personally and professionally. So please all feel free to continue to stay engaged with this work. And again, so much gratitude for Tanya and all of the work that you are doing at Full Frame Initiative. If there's any information that you also want to share to make sure people can stay plugged in with you, please feel free to do so.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
I hope you all enjoy the rest of your afternoon or evening or morning in general. And I hope to see you all again in the future. Thank you so much, Ms. Tucker. This was just wonderful.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Take care, everybody.